Arya sat by the window, staring at the fading sunlight as it cast long shadows across the room. The warm glow of dusk used to bring her comfort, a reminder that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was always another chance to make things right. But tonight, the light only deepened the ache in her chest. She had spent years standing beside her husband, Damien, through every hardship, every battle for power, every sleepless night when he doubted himself. She had given him everything, her love, her trust, her unwavering loyalty. She had believed in him when no one else did, fought for him when he could not fight for himself. And yet, as she sat in the grand estate they had built together, she could not shake the feeling that something was slipping through her fingers. The nights were colder now, not because of the weather, but because Damien no longer held her the way he used to. His kisses were absent, his touch distant, his words laced with impatience. He no longer looked at her the way he once did, as though she were the light guiding him through the darkness. The rumors had started months ago, whispered in hushed voices whenever she passed by. They spoke of another woman, one who had captured Damien's attention, one who had become the reason he no longer came home early. Arya had dismissed them at first, convincing herself that they were nothing more than envious lies. But denial had a way of breaking apart when faced with undeniable truth. Celine. The name haunted her, spoken far too many times by servants who pitied her, by nobles who watched with amusement. Celine, the woman who now stood where Arya once had. She had seen them together once. She had not meant to, but fate had a cruel way of leading her to the truth she had tried so hard to avoid. Hidden in the shadows of the corridor, she had watched as Damien leaned in, his lips brushing against Celine's with a tenderness that had once belonged to Arya. She had watched as his hand lingered at the small of Celine's back, a silent promise of affection. He had never looked at Arya that way in months. Something inside her had cracked then, something deep and fragile that no amount of hope could mend. But even in her pain, she had refused to believe that Damien would betray her completely. She had still believed in the man she had once loved, the man who had once loved her. Until the day he came to her with guards at his side and an accusation on his lips. The throne room was silent except for the echo of the charges being read. Treason. Conspiracy against the crown. Crimes she had never committed, yet the evidence against her was undeniable. A forged letter in her handwriting, secret documents discovered in her private chambers, witnesses who swore they had seen her conspiring with the enemy. It was a lie, all of it, yet no one stood in her defense. Not even the man she had devoted her life to. She turned to Damien, desperate for him to see the truth in her eyes. "You cannot believe this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the weight of her own disbelief. "You know me, Damien. You know I would never betray you." His gaze was cold, void of the love that had once burned so fiercely for her. He did not hesitate, did not waver. "You have deceived me for long enough," he said, his tone laced with finality. "I will not allow you to make a fool of me any longer." Her breath caught in her throat. This was not real. This could not be real. She searched his face for a sign, for even the smallest flicker of doubt. But there was nothing. Celine stood beside him, her lips curled into a subtle smile, her hand resting lightly on his arm. And then Arya understood. This was never about treason. This was about getting rid of her. The realization struck her like a blade to the heart. She had loved him, given him everything, and in return, he had condemned her to die. The trial was swift, a mere formality to mask the cruelty of it all. The decision had already been made. The day of her execution arrived with an eerie calmness. The world moved as though nothing had changed, as though her life had not been reduced to a tragic betrayal. She was led to the execution platform, her hands bound, her dress dirted from the prison she had spent the last few days in. The crowd gathered to watch, some with pity, others with indifference. But all she saw was him. Damien stood among the nobles, watching as the executioner prepared the blade. He did not look away. He did not turn his head in guilt. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. If there was even a sliver of regret in his heart, he did not show it. As she knelt before the executioner, Arya felt the weight of everything that had led her here. The love she had given so freely. The trust she had placed in the wrong man. The betrayal that had shattered her beyond repair. But in those final moments, as the sword was raised, she felt something else. Not fear. Not sorrow. But rage. A promise whispered in the depths of her soul. If there was another life beyond this one, she would return. And when she did, she would make sure Damien regretted the day he ever betrayed her. The world was dark, cold. Arya felt nothing, saw nothing, heard nothing. For a moment, she wondered if this was what death truly was. An endless void, silent and unforgiving. But then, something shifted. A warmth spread through her chest, like the faint flicker of a dying ember struggling to ignite. And suddenly there was light. She gasped as air filled her lungs, her body jolting awake as though pulled from the depths of the ocean. Her heart pounded violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sharp scent of lavender filled her nose, the soft touch of silk against her skin unfamiliar. Her eyes flew open, and what she saw stole the very breath from her lips. This room, this bed, these walls. She knew them. She pushed herself up, her trembling hands clutching the delicate fabric of her nightgown. Her mind screamed in confusion, her heart racing as she turned her gaze toward the full-length mirror across the room. The reflection staring back at her was not the woman who had died at the hands of betrayal. It was a younger version of herself, untouched by the pain and suffering she had endured. Her skin was smooth, unmarked by the scars of the prison cell where she had spent her final days. Her hair, once dull and matted with dirt, now cascaded down her shoulders in soft waves. Her eyes, which had once held nothing but fury and grief, were wide with shock and disbelief. This was not possible. Could not be possible. She stumbled out of bed, her legs weak beneath her. With unsteady steps, she made her way to the vanity, reaching out as if to confirm that what she was seeing was real. The cool glass of the mirror met her fingertips, and a shuddering breath left her lips. It was real. She was alive. But how? Then, like a floodgate bursting open, the memories came rushing back. The accusations. The cold look in Damien's eyes. The sharp edge of the executioner's blade. The blinding pain before everything had gone dark. And Celine. The woman who had stolen everything from her. The woman who had whispered venom into Damien's ear, twisting his love into hatred. The woman who had watched her die with a smile on her lips. A sharp, burning rage surged through Arya's veins. But beneath it, buried deep in the hollow space where her heart had once been, there was something else. Determination. Fate had given her another chance. A chance to rewrite her story. A chance to destroy those who had taken everything from her. She would not waste it. Her hands clenched into fists as she took a deep, steadying breath. This time, she would not be the weak, obedient wife who loved blindly. This time, she would not stand by Damien's side as his dutiful, trusting partner. This time, she would make him regret ever betraying her. The days that followed were filled with careful observation. She pieced together the timeline, recognizing the familiar moments she had once lived through without realizing their significance. The small, seemingly insignificant choices that had led her toward ruin. She was not yet married to Damien. Their engagement had been announced, but the wedding was still months away. That meant Celine had not yet fully ingrained herself into his life. The whispers of treason had not yet begun. The web of deception had not yet been spun. She still had time. But she would not simply avoid her fate. That would not be enough. She needed to change it. To reshape it into something far greater. And for that she needed power. Arya had spent her past life playing the role of a noblewoman, content in her husband's shadow. She had allowed herself to believe that love was enough, that devotion and kindness could protect her from the cruel nature of the world. She had been wrong. Power was the only true shield. Knowledge was the only true weapon. She began to train in secret. Every night, when the estate was quiet and the halls were empty, she studied. political strategy, economics, the subtle art of manipulation. She devoured books on warfare, learned the weaknesses of those who held power, memorized the patterns of influence that dictated the kingdom's fate. But knowledge alone was not enough. She needed more than intelligence. She needed strength. With careful discretion, she sought out a retired knight who had once served her family. Under the guise of preparing for self-defense, she convinced him to train her in combat. She learned how to hold a blade, how to strike with precision, how to defend herself against an attacker twice her size. The bruises that bloomed across her skin were a painful reminder of her weaknesses, but she welcomed them. Pain was temporary. Survival was necessary. The months passed, and Arya watched as Damien fell into the same patterns as before. He was as ambitious as she remembered, as calculating as she had once admired. But now she saw him for what he truly was. A man who valued power above all else. A man who would discard anything that stood in his way. He had loved her once, or so she had believed. But love, as she had come to learn, was not always enough to keep a man loyal. Selene had not yet entered the picture, but Arya knew it was only a matter of time. This time she would be ready. She would not beg for his love. She would not fight for his affection. She would ensure that by the time Selene tried to take her place, Damien would already be standing on the precipice of his own destruction. And when the moment came, she would be the one to push him over the edge. Arya stood before the grand mirror in her chambers, adjusting the delicate lace on the sleeve of her gown. The girl reflected back at her was the same as before. Soft features, wide eyes filled with warmth, the picture of an innocent noblewoman soon to be married to the man she adored. But beneath the surface, beneath the gentle smile she had mastered so well, was something far different. Gone was the naive girl who believed in love above all else. Gone was the devoted wife who had once given her heart so freely, only to have it crushed under the weight of betrayal. She had learned her lesson well. Love was not enough. Trust was not a gift to be given, but a weapon to be wielded. She turned from the mirror as the door to her chambers opened. A maid entered, her head bowed respectfully. "My lady, Lord Damien has requested your presence in the garden." Arya's smile was effortless, the very picture of a devoted fiancé. "Of course," she said softly, allowing just the right amount of eagerness to touch her voice. She had played this role before. She knew exactly how to wear the mask. As she walked through the estate, she took in every familiar detail. The tall marble pillars, the intricate golden chandeliers, the hushed voices of servants as they scurried about their duties. She had once considered this place her home, had once taken comfort in the idea of a future spent here by Damien's side. Now, every step she took was a reminder of the fate that had awaited her in her previous life. She would not let history repeat itself. Damien stood beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree, his dark eyes studying a letter in his hands. The same proud, ambitious man she had once loved with everything she had. The man who had betrayed her without hesitation. "Damien," she greeted, her voice warm as she approached. He looked up, his gaze softening as he took her in. "Arya, you look beautiful as always." She smiled, lowering her lashes just enough to feign shyness. "You flatter me too much." He reached for her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. She let him. She needed him to believe she was the same woman he remembered, the same adoring fiancé who would never dare question him. "I have been thinking," he said, tucking the letter away. "There is a banquet at Lord Everston's estate next week. I would like you to accompany me." In her past life, she had always been eager to please him, had always felt honored whenever he chose to bring her along. Now she saw it for what it was. A carefully calculated move to present her as the perfect wife, a woman meant to stand quietly beside him, never overshadowing him. "I would love to," she said sweetly, hiding the satisfaction curling in her chest. Social gatherings were opportunities, places where the powerful whispered secrets they thought no one else could hear. Damien smiled, clearly pleased. "Good. You will look stunning by my side." She allowed herself to laugh softly, stepping closer. I only wished to make you proud. The words were a lie, but they came so easily now. The days leading up to the banquet were spent preparing. But Arya was not only focused on gowns and jewelry. She was laying the groundwork for what was to come. In her past life, she had been isolated, too trusting of Damien to ever consider forming alliances of her own. Now she understood the importance of power, of having people who would stand with her when the time came. She sought out those who had once been mere background figures in her past, those who had been overlooked but held influence in ways Damien had never bothered to see. A merchant with a vast network of connections, a noblewoman whose whispers carried weight among the elite, a disgruntled advisor whose loyalty to the crown had been tested too many times. She planted the seeds carefully, never revealing too much, never letting on that she was anything more than the future wife of Lord Damien. But she listened, she observed, and slowly, she began to weave the first threads of her own power. The night of the banquet arrived, and Arya stood in front of the mirror as her maid fastened a delicate sapphire pendant around her neck. The deep blue matched her gown, a shade Damien had once said reminded him of the sea after a storm. A sentimental memory that had once warmed her heart. Now it meant nothing. She stepped into the grand hall, the hum of conversation filling the space. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the polished floors, and nobles moved like pieces on a chessboard, each maneuver calculated. Damien kept her close, his arm resting possessively on her waist as he greeted fellow lords and ladies. She played her part well, smiling at the right moments, laughing softly when expected. And then she saw her, Celine. The woman who had whispered lies into Damien's ear, who had watched Arya's downfall with amusement in her eyes. She was exactly as Arya remembered, elegant, poised, with a beauty that made men weak. But this time, Arya did not see her as a rival, did not feel the same crushing insecurity that had once eaten away at her. Celine was not her competition. She was a pawn who had played her role well in the past. But Arya was no longer playing the same game. Celine's eyes met hers across the room, surprise flickering in their depths. She had not expected to see Arya here. Not yet. Arya smiled. She approached, Damien at her side, as introductions were made. Lady Arya, Celine said smoothly, her voice like silk. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Damien has spoken so highly of you. Arya tilted her head, feigning innocence. Has he? That is kind of him. She turned her gaze to Damien, letting admiration shine in her eyes. I only hope to be the woman he deserves. Damien squeezed her hand, unaware of the lie woven into her words. Celine studied her, searching for weakness. But Arya had spent months preparing for this moment. She knew how to play this game now. Tell me, Lady Arya, Celine said, her smile sharp at the edges. How do you feel about your upcoming marriage? It must be overwhelming, stepping into such an important role. Arya let out a soft laugh, as though she had not considered the weight of it before. Overwhelming, perhaps for some. But I have always known that Damien and I are meant to be. She reached for his arm, letting her fingers rest lightly against his sleeve. There is nothing I would not do for him. Damien, pleased by her response, kissed her forehead. Celine's smile faltered just slightly. She had expected a different reaction. Uncertainty, nervousness, anything that would make Arya seem small in comparison. But Arya was not small. Not anymore. I admire your confidence, Celine said, masking her unease. Arya's smile widened, her gaze steady. Thank you, she said, her voice gentle. Confidence is important, is it not? Especially when facing those who might wish to see you fall. For just a moment, she saw the flicker of something in Celine's eyes. Uncertainty. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. But Arya had seen it. She had won the first move. As the evening continued, she remained by Damien's side, but her mind was already working ahead. Celine believed she was weak. Damien believed she was his. They were both wrong. And soon they would realize it. The night air was crisp as Arya sat in the dimly lit study, a single candle flickering beside her. Stacks of documents lay before her, reports on trade routes, tax records, and merchant dealings, things she had once considered beyond her concern. In her past life, she had left all matters of business to Damien, trusting that he would provide for her, that his success was their success. That blind faith had cost her everything. Not this time. She had spent months carefully weaving a network of power, building influence in the very areas Damien had neglected. Where he sought status through noble alliances, she focused on the foundation of wealth, trade, land, and commerce. Money was the root of true power, the quiet force that dictated who rose and who fell. A knock at the door drew her attention. She set down her quill, smoothing out the parchment before her. "Come in." The door creaked open, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Leon. His dark eyes flickered with something unreadable as he took in the sight before him. "I never expected to see you immersed in trade agreements, Arya." She smiled, motioning for him to sit. "There are many things you never expected from me." Leon had been a presence in her past life, a nobleman with quiet strength, always watching from the sidelines. He had admired her once, though she had been too blinded by Damien to see it. She had ignored his warnings, brushed aside his concerns. Now she knew better. "You sent for me," he said, leaning back in his chair, studying her carefully. "What is it you want?" Arya did not hesitate. "An alliance." His lips curved into a wry smile. "An alliance? And what makes you think I would risk my standing for you?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Because you know what Damien truly is. And because I can offer you something he never could." He tilted his head slightly. "And what is that?" "Control," she said simply. "Damien's strength lies in appearances. He holds power because people believe he does. But power built on illusion is fragile." Leon watched her, considering. "And what are you offering in return?" "Influence," she answered. "I know the key players, their weaknesses, their secrets. I can secure trade deals that Damien has ignored, strengthen alliances he has neglected. If you stand with me, we will not only weaken him, we will surpass him." A long silence stretched between them before Leon finally spoke. "You are not the same woman I once knew." "No," she agreed. "I am not." A slow smile spread across his lips. "Then let us see what we can build together." Over the next few weeks, Arya worked tirelessly. With Leon's support, she secured control over several key trade routes, strengthening her position in the financial sector. She reached out to merchants and landowners, offering them better deals than Damien ever had. And slowly the shift began. Damien noticed first in small ways. A merchant he had long relied on suddenly pulled out of negotiations, favoring another patron. A nobleman who had once sought his favor now turned his attention elsewhere. His influence, once unquestioned, now faced unexpected obstacles. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. But as the weeks passed and the pattern continued, Arya saw the first flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was not long before he confronted her. "You have been busy," he said one evening, his voice carefully controlled. They stood in the drawing room, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. Arya looked up from her book, her expression innocent. "Whatever do you mean?" Damien stepped closer, his dark eyes searching hers. "Do not play coy with me, Arya. I've heard whispers. You have been meeting with merchants, securing trade deals. You have been interfering." She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Interfering? I am merely ensuring our future is secure. Is that not my duty as your fiancé?" His jaw clenched. "You have never taken an interest in such matters before." She smiled. "I suppose I have learned a great deal recently." He studied her for a long moment, and for the first time, Arya saw something new in his gaze. Not admiration. Not love. Fear. It was subtle, barely there, but she recognized it. He did not understand what had changed, but he knew something had. And she was not finished yet. The final stroke came when she exposed one of his well-kept secrets. A noblewoman had approached her discreetly, a woman Damien had wronged in his rise to power. In her past life, Arya had never known the full extent of his dealings, but now she saw clearly. Damien had framed an innocent man for embezzlement, stripping him of his title and lands to claim them for himself. Arya ensured the truth came to light. It began as whispers among the elite, a quiet murmur spreading through the court. Then documents surfaced, records that could not be denied. The nobleman's son stepped forward, demanding justice. The scandal erupted, and for the first time, Damien found himself on the defensive. His allies began to distance themselves. His influence began to crumble. And Arya watched it all with quiet satisfaction. She had played the game before. This time she would win. Damien had never feared losing anything before. Power had always come easily to him. Loyalty had always been granted without question, and those around him had always bent to his will. He had believed Arya was no different. She had been soft, devoted, and unquestioning. A woman who stood by his side without hesitation, who loved him without condition. He had taken her for granted because he had believed she would always be there. But now, as he watched her from across the grand ballroom, something inside him twisted painfully. Arya stood in the center of the room, draped in a gown of deep crimson, a color he had never seen her wear before. It suited her, the boldness of it, the quiet power it exuded. She smiled as she spoke to nobles who had once been his allies, her laughter light, her gaze sharp. They hung on her every word, drawn to her in a way that left Damien feeling unsettled. Had not always been this way. She had once been content to stand in his shadow. But now she was the light that drew everyone in. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had underestimated her. He had thought her newfound confidence was a passing phase, something that would fade once she was firmly under his control again. But it had only grown, and with it, his own influence had begun to wane. He had tried to stop her, had attempted to regain control in ways that had always worked before. He had spoken to nobles in secret, trying to discredit her, but each time he moved against her, she countered effortlessly. He had tried to manipulate the merchants, but she had already secured their loyalty. Even the king's advisors, once firmly in his corner, now looked to Arya for counsel. Every move he made only strengthened her. And worse than that, he found himself drawn to her in a way he never had before. She was no longer the quiet, obedient wife he had expected. She was something far more dangerous. Intelligent, cunning, fearless. She played the game better than he ever had, and he hated that he could not look away. For the first time in his life, Damien wanted something he could not have. He would not allow it to end this way. Selene had always been a useful tool, her charm and beauty an easy way to manipulate those around her. She had played her role well in the past, whispering in his ear, guiding him toward the decisions that had ultimately led to Arya's downfall. But now, Selene was nothing more than a liability. The nobles no longer trusted her, the scandal of Damien's recent downfall casting doubt on everyone in his circle. And Arya had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The trap was set. It began with a single letter, delivered in secret to Selene's chambers. A forged note from one of Damien's remaining allies, warning her that Arya planned to expose her in front of the court. Selene, panicked and desperate, did exactly as Arya had predicted. The next evening, at a gathering of nobles, Selene lost control. She approached Damien in full view of the court, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. "You promised me she would be nothing," Selene hissed, her grip tightening on his sleeve. "You told me she would never be a threat." The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward them. Damien stiffened, his heart pounding as he realized what she had done. "Selene," he warned, his voice low. But she was already unraveling, her desperation clouding her judgment. "She is ruining you," she spat, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "You said she was weak. You said she was nothing without you. But look at her. Look at what she has done to you." Murmurs spread through the crowd, whispers of doubt and betrayal. Damien felt the weight of every gaze in the room. And then Arya spoke. "Lady Selene," she said, her voice calm, amused even. "It seems you have quite a lot to say tonight." Selene turned, her face paling as Arya stepped forward. Arya's expression was one of quiet triumph, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Tell me," she continued, tilting her head slightly, "how long have you been working against me? Was it from the moment I married Damien? Or was it even before then?" Selene opened her mouth to speak, but the damage was already done. The whispers had grown louder, the realization spreading through the crowd. Selene had admitted everything. Damien clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He could not protect her from this. Not this time. Arya had planned it all. Selene turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "Say something," she begged. "Tell them I am lying." But he could not. Arya had outplayed them both. Selene let out a strangled gasp, stepping back as the weight of her mistake settled in. And then, without another word, she fled. The silence that followed was suffocating. Damien turned to Arya, his throat tight. "You did this," he said, his voice quiet. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "Did I?" He swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. "You wanted this." She stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. "I told you once that I would do anything for you. That there was nothing I would not sacrifice for your success." She tilted her head slightly. "But you never asked yourself what would happen if I turned that same devotion against you." His breath caught. She leaned in, her voice a whisper against his ear. "Now you know." And then she turned, walking away without another word. Damien watched her go, the weight of his own mistakes crushing down on him. For the first time in his life, he truly understood regret. The grand halls that once echoed with Damien's triumphant footsteps now stood silent. Chandeliers that had once bathed him in golden light now seemed dim, as if even the very walls of his estate had turned against him. The weight of the silence pressed down on him, suffocating and heavy. The nobles had abandoned him. The merchants who once sought his favor now avoided his gaze. Even the servants who had once feared him moved with indifference, knowing that his days of power were over. He had spent years building his influence, climbing higher than anyone had thought possible. And in mere months, Arya had dismantled it all. The final blow had come swiftly. The king had summoned him that morning, his voice devoid of warmth. "Damien," the king had said, his expression hard, "you have failed me." Documents had been laid before him, evidence of corruption, of betrayals he had long thought buried. Financial records proving mismanaged funds, testimonies from nobles detailing his backroom dealings. It was everything needed to strip him of his title, everything required to bring his downfall to completion. And it had Arya's fingerprints all over it. The king's judgment had been swift. Damien was to be stripped of his status, his lands confiscated, his wealth seized. He was no longer a nobleman. He was nothing. Now, as he sat in his nearly empty estate, the weight of his own ruin settling in, he realized the bitter truth. He had never truly feared losing until he lost her. For years, he had seen Arya as nothing more than an obedient wife, a piece in his grand game of power. He had discarded her, betrayed her, and sent her to her death without a second thought. And yet, she had come back, not as the woman who had loved him, but as the woman who would destroy him. And she had succeeded. The door creaked open. Damien looked up, his breath catching in his throat. Arya stood in the doorway, her presence commanding, her gown as dark as the night that had swallowed his fortune. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp edge of her gaze. For a moment, he could do nothing but stare. Then, he did something he never thought he would. He dropped to his knees. "Arya," he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken. "Please." She did not move, did not speak. "I was a fool," he continued, his hands trembling at his sides. "I did not see you. I did not understand. But I do now. I. He swallowed hard, his pride crumbling. I loved you. I love you still. She let out a quiet breath, tilting her head slightly, as if considering his words. Love, she repeated, her voice laced with cold amusement. You speak of love now, Damien. He flinched at the way she said his name, as if it were a curse upon her lips. I was blind, he admitted, desperation bleeding into his voice. But I am not anymore. I will do anything to make this right. Arya finally stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. She crouched slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. You ask for forgiveness, she said softly. But tell me, Damien, did you ever consider asking for it when you signed my death sentence? When you stood there and watched as I was torn away from everything I knew? His breath shuddered. He had not. He had never once thought to ask. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Damien. I do not forgive you. Something inside him shattered. Arya stood, straightened her shoulders and turned her back to him. He wanted to scream, to beg, to plead. But no words came. She walked away, her steps steady, unwavering. And as the doors closed behind her, sealing him in the ruins of his own making, Damien understood what true despair felt like. For the first time in his life, he had lost everything. And she had won. The sun rose over the capital, casting golden light over a city that no longer belonged to Damien. It was a new dawn, one that marked the end of an era and the beginning of something far greater. Arya stood on the balcony of her new estate, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming roses. This place was hers. Not something given to her by a husband, not a home where she was meant to be silent and obedient, but a fortress of her own making. She had torn down the man who once controlled her fate. She had reclaimed everything he had stolen from her. And now, for the first time in both her lives, she was truly free. Footsteps echoed behind her. She did not turn. Arya! She recognized the voice instantly. Leon. He had been there when she needed him, his loyalty unwavering. He had not questioned her decisions, had not tried to control her. He had only stood by her side, believing in her when no one else did. She finally turned to face him. He was not the same man from her past life. In that life, he had watched her from a distance, carrying feelings he never voiced. This time, he had fought alongside her, had helped her build a future that was no longer dictated by betrayal and heartbreak. There was warmth in his gaze, but something else too. Hesitation. Arya, he said again, softer this time. I have waited long enough to say this. She did not stop him. I love you, he said, the words steady and sure. I have loved you in ways I never had the courage to admit before. I do not ask for an answer now. I only want you to know. Arya felt the weight of his words settle in the air between them. In another time, in another life, she might have been desperate for love, for something to fill the emptiness left behind by Damien's betrayal. But she was no longer that woman. She did not need to belong to someone else to feel whole. She smiled not in rejection but in understanding. Leon, she said gently, for the first time in my life I want to live for myself. There was no disappointment in his eyes. Only respect. Then I will wait, he said simply. No matter how long it takes. She nodded, turning back to the horizon. Far away, in the crumbling remains of what was once his empire, Damien watched. He had nothing left. No power, no allies, no wealth. He had tried to rebuild, but every door was closed to him. The same people who had once admired him now spoke only of Arya, of her brilliance, of the way she had outmaneuvered him at every turn. And worst of all, she had not spared him even a second glance. He had loved her too late. And now, he was forced to live with the knowledge that she had risen higher than ever, while he had fallen lower than he ever thought possible. Arya breathed in deeply, letting the past finally settle behind her. This time she was not his weak wife. She was his nightmare.